This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by Shark Coatings. Get a different kind of gift this holiday season. Visit sharkfloorcoatings.com when you need professional floor coating services done right the first time.
Want more Gators Breakdown? Join Gators Breakdown Plus. Starting at $3 a month, get access to unique episodes, plus a blog, chat room, giveaways, shout-outs, and more. Gators Breakdown Plus is furthering the interaction with fans and listeners like you. Head to gatorsbreakdown.supportingcast.fm to join Gators Breakdown Plus today. Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Coming at you right here on a Monday night, a couple days after Florida loses to Oregon State 30-3. Joining me right here is co-host Will Miles. You can find him on Twitter at WillMilesSEC. His site, readandreaction.com, and on YouTube at Read and Reaction. Will, that was everybody knows the intro. Everybody kind of knows the moniker for Gators Breakdown. There's never a dull moment. Well, there hasn't been a lot of exciting moments either.
I was going to say the second and third quarter on offense, they were pretty dull the other night against Oregon State. 7 total yards. That was a debacle, man.
Oh, man. Yeah. Look, I don't think neither one of us knew that game, or both of us kind of knew that game was, probably not going to go too well for Florida. It wasn't going to look too pretty for the Gators, but I still didn't expect what we saw at times of that game, and then losing 30-3, kicking a field goal at the very end, as Will said, the 7 total yards on offense in the second or third quarter. Especially because that came on the heels when Florida was moving the ball, but then shot themselves in the foot with penalties. And Will, I know you went in really depth with that angle of stuff. I went in depth with that part of it on the episode, the post game episode as well. It was just a continuation, my friend, of the last couple games of the season.
Well, on the bright side, we didn't have any illegal formation penalties, so at least we got that fixed, but didn't get the false starts fixed, certainly didn't get the special teams fixed. The quarterback position, I think we expected that to take a step back, but even when plays were there, they weren't made. The offensive line wasn't any good. They couldn't open up any holes for the running backs, and eventually allowed the Oregon State pass rush to get home. It was just all around. The defense couldn't stop anybody. And, we can talk about all the turnover and all the players that weren't there and that sort of stuff. But really the only guy on defense who wasn't there all year was Trevez Johnson. So it's not as though
and Ventrell Miller most of the season.
And Ventrell Miller. So it's not as though the defense was missing like 17 guys. So I heard a lot of people afterwards go, how can you say it's embarrassing? We're missing like half the roster. It's like, well, all the guys who declared for the portal, all the guys who weren't playing weren't guys who were out there all year long. The bowl game is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be competitive. You're supposed to want to go out there and play. Especially when you're in a first year with a head coach, right? Like it's a little bit different in that Cotton Bowl in 2020 when everyone's sort of coming down off the fact that you might have had an opportunity to make the playoff. This is one where theoretically you're playing for playing time next year. And I wouldn't say a lot of people earn playing time against Oregon State. That would be my not so, my Mr. Obvious statement of the day here is not a lot of people earn playing time after that performance against Oregon State.
Yeah, well, and it is hard to know what to take away and how much to take away is probably one angle of this. We do know there was a lot of roster turnover, but as you stated, that there wasn't a lot of impact players there. Did it maybe mess with depth a little bit? You might be able to sell me on that, but it's not like the starters were out there dominating. And look, this was a good Oregon State team anyway. So Florida was going to have to play a good game. If they weren't going to able to play a good game for whatever reason, I guess a 30-3 outcome was what you were going to get in a lot of fashion. So not too much more on that game, honestly. I used to say you can you can read Will's thoughts there at readreaction.com. It goes to an in-depth, a lot of stuff that we'll hit tonight, but we'll probably reference that bowl game a little bit, but we are going to go through and kind of talk about what we've learned about this team and Billy Napier throughout the 6 and 7 season, his debut season for the Gators. And we'll get into that. Also, before we sign off, of course, early signing period starts on Wednesday. And just a week ago, Will, we felt really good. They're getting some good vibes, getting some good momentum. And then now a week later, the vibes and momentum seem to be kind of disappeared for disappearing for Florida as we head into Wednesday and Thursday there for the Gators. So plenty to get into on this episode, Will, but I don't know how much good news there's going to be in this one.
Well, clearly Bob Redman is banned from the show. And no, I'm kidding. But we had him on last week, and all of a sudden, everything was very positive, and not just. I mean, I think Bob sort of was reading the tea leaves and thought things were
Yeah,
going in a
yeah.
positive direction. I think you and I were too, from the things that you particularly were hearing behind the scenes. And obviously, things change, and Okunlola's now with the Miami Hurricanes, at least temporarily. Maybe they can flip him after before signing day comes. But luckily I don't have to come on here and eat pancakes. I suppose that's the silver lining, and everybody won't have to see me fill my fat face for the pancake challenge with Okunlola. But look, I mean, it's depressing, right? You go out there and you lose a game. It's different. There's a difference between losing and getting embarrassed. And that really, to me, is the difference in the bowl game. If Florida lost by 14 points and they'd just been overmatched by Oregon State, and Oregon State pulls away in the second half because they're able to sort of run them over, and clearly Florida's running out of gas, that's one thing. But just the litany of errors that went on in that game against Oregon State, I think, points towards something deeper. And you even mentioned it in the podcast that you did right after the game, that it was a continuation of the end of the season. And then you go into recruiting, and last year, Harold Perkins and Jacoby Matthews and a couple other guys on the actual national signing day did not end up going Florida's way. Those were all guys who were on the radar but did not go Florida's way. And you look up and Harold Perkins is just terrorizing people for LSU this year. So you see what guys of his ilk are able to do. There's nobody in this 2023 class right now with Harold Perkins type of upside. There are guys who may end up being All-Americans, there are guys who may end up being All SEC, but there's nobody who you say is a rock solid guarantee to do that. Perkins was one of those guys. And so you start looking at a guy like Okunlola, you start looking at Desmond Ricks, you start looking at Cormani McLean. Those are all guys who have that ability, and those are the guys that you got to start bringing in. So it's disappointing when you look at it and say, if you gave me a choice between Miami's recruiting class or Florida's recruiting class right now, I'd tell you that I want Miami's recruiting class. And, Mario Cristobal is in the exact same situation as Billy Napier, coming in from Oregon to Miami, having to get his transition class put together. Had a terrible year there down in Coral Gables. They went 5-7. They weren't any better than Florida was, but they were getting the job done on the trail, which gives you hope for what's coming up in the next couple of years. And as of right now, the Florida program is sort of stuck in that 9, 10, 11, 12 range in terms of recruiting. And, we were getting that before. Now, look, I think this class is more talented than the ones that Dan Mullen brought in. And I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I think there's also been an
Hold on, Will. I don't know if you can hear me. I lost you.
Yep. Yeah, can you hear me?
I don't All right, Will, you got me.
I do.
There we go. Technology these days. All right, we're back. We're back now.
All right, we got the technical difficulties going on. Apparently, everybody in the comments could hear me. I could hear you. You just
Yeah, this
all of a sudden don't.
I got this newfangled podcast board, and for whatever reason, it won't still show it out there. So,
Well, look, it's really sort of appropriate for the season that right at the end we would have technical difficulties on a podcast where you take so much pride in going live and doing everything.
That's the thing. Yeah,
without any
if
sort
we
of
weren't live,
hiccups.
this would not have been an issue at all.
Well, this will be fun for everybody on iTunes. They'll be wondering what's that 45-second gap while those two aren't saying anything. But I don't remember what I was saying other than the recruiting has been underwhelming thus far to finish here, and the season obviously was underwhelming to finish the season here. And so, look, what are we left to hold on to, right? I think that's the thing that you got to start looking at is what do we take from this that's good? What did we learn? I think that's a big part of what we're going to talk about tonight. And it's not all peaches and cream. And we're not going to pump sunshine. There are things that need to improve, and we'll be honest and tell you when that's true. And it is what it is, right? I mean, this is a long-term rebuild if you're going to rebuild it the way these guys have tried to do it so far.
There you go. That'd be the first thing I say we've learned. It's not going to be a fast build, not going to be a fast turnaround. It is going to take some time. But before we get there, everybody hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so yet right here on YouTube. May not like a lot of what we have to say, but at least, like, as Will said, we're going to try and keep it real as we can. I won't necessarily say negative. We're just going to try and keep it real. And look, it was a 6-7 season. That tells you right there. There's not a lot of positives to take away there from this season for the Gators. But hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You guys check us out here every Monday night right here on Gators Breakdown. And check us out, Gators Breakdown Plus, Discord, really on fire right now. All the conversation going on the heels of the bowl game, leading up to early signing period. Lots of conversation going on right there on that side of it. So, yeah, let's get into, Will, right now, what as we said, what we learned this season. And we can, kind of bullet point it and kind of go from there. But, yeah, I think we can, say not a fast build. This is going to, unfortunately, probably take some time. And we'll probably have to be patient and maybe –
Yeah, I mean, I think that I can't hear you, Dave. What's going on, buddy?
right there. I don't know
There
what's
we go.
going on. Yeah.
So it's going to be a long rebuild. It's going to be a long rebuild. But
this episode might be a long rebuild too.
I was gonna say by the time we get this program rebuilt, we'll have the audio things fixed. Now, I think the thing I wrote down is I said that we got a long way to go. Just be good. Forget about elite, and that's the disturbing part, right? Is that you could put an elite quarterback on this team this year, they go 8-4. Like, that defense was so bad that this isn't a one-player fix. Even if you get an elite quarterback, it's not a 10-player fix. I think Neil Blackman tweeted, the defense is a 2 recruiting class problem, which in some ways is true, right? I mean, you figure all the attrition that Florida's had over the past few years, and it caught up with them. And I think there are other reasons, and we'll talk about that in terms of what did we learn, I'm sure, as well. But that this isn't, we played some teams well, but that's not what the Florida standard is, right? The Florida standard is you sort of play a game where you don't maybe show up completely and, hey, you find a way to win that one. Or maybe even you show up and that's the one you lose. But, look, 10-2 is the standard. And to get back there on a fairly regular basis, it's going to take a little while.
Yeah. And, I went back to this the other night. And I know you've brought it up too. And, we did have the kind of somewhat okay, I'll say faster. I won't say instant success, but faster success. You're one of Jim McElwain, and then somewhat instant success with Dan Mullen, and those of course, ended up not great. McElwain fired year 3, Dan Mullen fired year 4. Those great early starts end up not amounting to much. Didn't take Florida to the next level. But, we came out of those seasons for McElwain. It was, we found a way to get to Atlanta. Maybe that's something to build on. Okay, no, it wasn't. For Dan Mullen, it was, okay, Kirby was still in his infancy at Georgia. We may have our guy. He's only about a year behind Kirby, a couple years behind Kirby, and maybe winning on the field for Dan Mullen will take the next step in recruiting, and he'll close that gap. And that never happened. But those were the thoughts coming after year 1, where you have early success, and maybe you close the gap somewhere. For Jim McElwain, it was closing the gap versus Alabama. You had played them first year SEC championship game. Okay. Dan Mullen, it was closed, maybe trying to close the gap towards Georgia. But for Billy Napier, it's, you lose the season with the ending record. And as you said, Will, we can't even kind of, have the same conversations of, where does this put Florida in the pantheon of elite in the SEC? It's, can we now get a team that will beat Vanderbilt? Can we now beat a team that will beat Kentucky? And, as you said, at least the next step for Florida is win the games I don't even say you're supposed to win. I guess we should say Florida's supposed to win those games. But now it's just go out there and you maybe put a product on the field to where you go out there and I'll still say win the games you're supposed to win.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. One is that Napier has definitely decided to build the program at this point in a different way than Mullen and McElwain did. I mean, Mullen and McElwain was perfectly content to ride the Muschamp defenses there for a couple of years to his level of success, and Mullen was perfectly content to ride the McElwain recruiting classes to his early wins, right, with Felipe Franks and LaMichael Pirine and even Kyle Trask and a bunch of guys who were able to provide early success, even though, especially in that 10-3 first season, I think a lot of that was kind of a mirage in terms of their ability to win some of those close games. McElwain and Mullen both were really successful in one-score games. Napier, not so much. I think he was 3-3 this year in one-score games. And so if he'd have gone 5-1 in those one-score games, do we feel differently? I think we probably do. Mm-hmm. But we still need to realize that it was fool's gold when McElwain was winning all those one-score games. It was fool's gold when Mullen was winning all those one-score games. You can say, well, they were better on-field coaches. That may even be true. But winning one-score games is not a sustainable way to win in college football. Even Alabama plays close games every once in a while, and Saban doesn't always come out on top. The reason Saban wins national championships the way he does is he doesn't get into those games very often. So he goes 1-0 or 1-1 in a season in those one-score games. And so, look up at the end of the year, and they're 11-1 or 12-1, and they're going to the national championship or they're going to the playoff. And same thing with Clemson, same thing with Georgia, same thing with some of these same thing with Ohio State, right? And so avoiding those is the benefit. It's interesting. You go look back at Saban and Smart, and I think we talked about this like a month ago after the loss to Vanderbilt. There's a lot of coaches. In fact, the guy right before Nick Saban had a really bad loss. Mike Shula had a really bad loss on his resume in his first year, and he was jettisoned relatively quickly there from Alabama. So it's just a bad loss doesn't necessarily mean anything, but everybody has struggled in their first year. The question is what happens when you come out in that second year? And what you see with both Smart and Saban is they started blowing people out of the water in year 2. And so that to me is going to be the thing that should drive hope for Florida fans next year. Is look, Napier's not going anywhere, but if they play a bunch of one-score games against next year, you pretty much know that we're not going to get to where we need to get to. If they're blowing people out, and by blowout I mean like 20 plus points, 5, 6, 7 opponents, well, now we look at it and say he's on that same trajectory that those guys were. Maybe it'll take him longer to get there. And in many ways, that's because those guys are there, right? I mean, when Steve Spurrier took over, there wasn't that behemoth sitting there in the SEC. And even when Urban Meyer took over, there wasn't that behemoth in the SEC. Now you got 2 of them. Mm-hmm. And so and Brian Kelly's no slouch at LSU either. So you're going to have to beat those guys, and you're going to have to find ways to win those games. And, look, Napier, it may be a little bit of an uphill climb. I think we know that now based on what we've seen, but there's still an opportunity to salvage things here. I don't think this year was like a complete loss, but I don't think it was great. And I think especially the last 3 games leave a bad taste in your mouth. But, I think the Mullen and McElwain eras left enough of a bad taste in my mouth that I feel like I especially overreacted to those 10-3 and 10-4 seasons to start with. And I'm not going to do that here. I'm going to look at this and go 6-7 isn't good. There's a lot of things to be concerned about. We need to be looking at recruiting specifically in terms of where we're going. We need more elite recruits. There's all those different things we can talk about. But I do think you don't want to overreact to the first year, because Napier has decided to build the team by turning over the players rather than relying on the previous regime. And so, I think we're going to have to give him the time to show what he can do with his evaluation, because that is one of the other things that I think we learned this year, is that he's pretty good at that.
There you go. Let's go to one of my next points, and we'll go a little bit positive here. Think about the best players on the team, Will, and I think we brought this up before, but Osiris Torrance. Now, granted, two of the transfers you brought from Louisiana, you had an end there. You took advantage of that end. Osiris Torrance comes in automatically, one of the best offensive linemen in the country. Goes on to win a ton of awards this past week. Will be a very high pick in the NFL draft. A guy you developed at Louisiana, you brought him with him. That development at Louisiana transferred to the SEC. That was a big question coming in. Could these Louisiana transfers, Osiris Torrance, Montrell Johnson, have success in the Sun Belt? Would that mean they have success in the SEC? Osiris Torrance absolutely did there against some of the best competition. And now also you talk about Montrell Johnson as well, and you pair him with running back Trevor Etienne. I mean, the running backs were the best, most consistent skill players here for the Gators offense, and both were in their first year at Florida. Montrell Johnson, still a very young player, transfer from Louisiana, and probably probably the bigger question of could he hold up in SEC play, and he did a good job there. Yards per carry, pretty high there for him. And Montrell Johnson comes in as a true freshman. Trevor Etienne comes in as a true freshman, and going back to that storyline, we thought it was going to be Lorenzo Lingard as the third running back when the first depth chart comes out. It is Trevor Etienne. He goes out there, and from right away, Will, we could definitely tell this is a different kind of back. He goes to the outside versus Utah, gains some yardage, and we could tell there's a different type of speed, a different type of player there as a true freshman for Trevor Etienne. So I think you could almost say your top three players are Osiris Torrance and the two running backs, Billy Napier players. And then you throw in, statistically, your best receiver, Ricky Pearsall. Now, Justin Shorter doesn't get hurt. They're up there, but Ricky Pearsall comes in as an instant impact at the wide receiver position. And then the players, you go on all the transfers and throw in true freshman Trevor Etienne, you can say, and they're all on offense, Will. So that's, I think, speaks for something as well. Billy Napier decided to bring in transfers on the offensive side of the ball, and then get a true freshman in early as Trevor Etienne. And right away, you could tell these guys were instant contributors, and they were all in their first year, all brought in by Billy Napier.
Yeah, I think it's more than just that. I mean, if you look at Shamar James, Etienne, Chris McClellan, Devin Moore, Kamari Wilson, they were all the blue chip guys, and they all contributed. Devin Moore got hurt, obviously, but Kamari Wilson had 30-plus tackles. McClellan had more than 20 tackles. Etienne had over 700 yards. Shamar James had more than 40 tackles. And so you look at what is coming in terms of year two. You have Austin Barber, who's a redshirt freshman, but ends up being all SEC or all freshman SEC. Same thing with Etienne and James. I believe they were honorable mention all SEC. So you're starting to fill out that all SEC freshman team, which is an important benchmark. And then you mentioned the 4 contributing transfers. But what's interesting is when you go back and look at the actual 2022 class, you've got 26 guys total when you talk about transfers and recruits. You had 5 top 300, all 5 contributed, and you have 4 contributing transfers. So 12 of the 26 guys that are contributing, so 50% contribution rate in the first year. And now you're getting an influx of talent significantly more than what you got in that first class. So they had 5 top 300 guys. They got way more than that. I think they got 16 in this class who are in the top 300, maybe a little bit less than that. They have 18 4-stars. They're not all in the top 300, but they've got 15 or 16 guys in the top 300. So he doesn't even have to hit 100%. If he hits 60% in terms of those guys being able to contribute their freshman year at the same level as James, Etienne, McClellan, Moore, and Wilson, you're going to see a significant increase in productivity on the field. And you expect to see significant jumps for those guys who played their freshman year, right? Mm-hmm. Now you're still dealing with the same issue, which is if you end up with any sort of injuries, do you have anybody to step into that spot? And quite honestly, Florida was pretty injury lucky this year. Yeah. There were not a lot of injuries that really caused problems, and that's eventually going to hit them. But look, I think if you hit at the right spots, right? If Aiden Mizell and Eugene Wilson become big time wide receivers, nobody's going to forget. Nobody's going to sit there and go, well, we should have gotten guys in the top 15 because they were sure things. You just have to hit, right? If Jaden Rashada turns out to be a really good quarterback next year, same thing. But what he is, the positive side is that he's been able to evaluate to get these guys into a place where they're able to do it. I mean, if you look at Mullen's first class, he had 10 of 24 who contributed. He actually had 13 top 300 guys, but only 6 contributed, and then had 4 contributing transfers. But even if you look at that, Kyle Pitts was actually a guy that I would say wasn't a contributor. They sort of wasted a year of Pitts not being in there, even though he's fantastic. The top 2 wide receivers were Jacob Copeland and Justin Watkins. Copeland obviously was a disappointment, especially early on. Watkins was dismissed from the team before he ever even got to camp. And then you got Van Jefferson and Trevon Grimes were really the contributors at the wide receiver spot transfers. Andrew Chatfield, more contributions at Oregon State than he actually had at Florida. Malik Langham and Marlon Dunlap. And then you got Amari Burney and Trey Dean as sort of the contributors from that class. And obviously, I think there's some people who would prefer to forget some of the plays that those guys have been on the field. I would say if I look at the 2018 class, the best player on the team, the best recruit brought in was Kyle Pitts. The second best was Damian Pierce. Third best was Richard Garage. And I think the fourth best was Evan McPherson. And so I think you can already look at the 2022 class and say, Florida, you're not going to get to a kicker. You're not getting to Trey Smack by the fourth guy in this particular class, right? So in terms of, is more talent coming in? Yes, it is. Now, that's a different question than is enough talent coming in to beat LSU, Georgia, and Alabama. But I think it's a step in the right direction. So, look, I think Napier has proven through both the transfers and the recruits that he's bringing in that his evaluation skills seem to be pretty good. But he's going to have to continue that because some of the other things we've learned this year.
Yeah, so Osiris Torrance, the running backs, Trevor Etienne, Ricky Pearsall, some of the better players on the team. Throw in Anthony Richardson, Austin Barber, Ventrell Miller, and Amari Burney. And those are about among, the top 10 players on the team. And that's mostly Napier players that he brought in through the transfer portal and that one true freshman. One more positive, Will, but kind of get back to the other side of things is, throughout the season, the team, the team fought back in the losses. And I know that might sound, cherry picking and stuff, but if we're trying to pick at things that we learned, the team did fight. And it may not amount to much, definitely not amounted to wins, but it definitely amounted to some exciting games there and giving Florida a chance to win those games at the end there. But storming back versus Tennessee, storming back versus LSU. Florida State as well when that third quarter wasn't going so well. And then the Vanderbilt game, too. I can't believe I had to bring that one up. But, yeah, I had to bring that one up, too, for Florida. Trying to make something happen at the end to win that game. So, yeah, if you want to, like I said, maybe even cherry pick for some positives here before we kind of get back to the bad parts of the 6 and 7 season. The team did fight back for Napier and for their teammates to get back in these ball games.
Yeah, I think that's actually what was disappointing most about the Oregon State loss is that you felt like the team coming into the third quarter was going to fight a little bit, and then it just didn't feel like there was anything left, and that sucked, right? I mean, you sit there and you watch it, and you go, I mean, I'll tell you about halfway through that third quarter, I'm like, wow, I'm glad I didn't rearrange anything to fly out to Las Vegas. I'll tell you that much. And then, even then, I mean, it would have been fun to go to Las Vegas.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. Maybe hopefully we don't get the Las Vegas Bowl next year, but if there's an opportunity to go back out there, I might do it just for that. But yeah, it's one of those things where there were times where Florida lost and you had to always enter things in by saying, hey, no, you always had to enter the conversation by saying no moral victories. But you looked at it, you said, God, they're really close in some aspects of things. And then they'd come out the next week and completely lay an egg, whether it was the offensive side of the ball or whether it was the defensive side of the ball. I mean, you think about that Tennessee game and you're like, all right, there's some momentum there that we can really do something with. And then they come out and can't do anything on offense against Missouri. And it takes a pick six to essentially keep them in the game until Richardson can make one or two plays.
I will continue there because my next point was can't handle momentum. So just continue there.
Well, you think about the LSU game where they come out there and you're like, oh, LSU's been bad on offense all year. Touchdown, 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 touchdown. 6 straight touchdowns to open up the game. The Georgia game we expected. You got the weird Jekyll and Hyde first half and second half against Texas A&M where they can't stop Haynes King, even though Haynes King couldn't put up any numbers around it against anybody all year. You've got they stopped Spencer Rattler, and then Rattler comes out and can't be stopped the next 2 games. I mean, so it wasn't just Florida that was Jekyll and Hyde this year. I mean, South Carolina had a little bit of that in them too. So, look, I think that's what happens when you have a team that just is inconsistent. They were inconsistent within games. They were inconsistent within quarters. They were inconsistent within drives. And, so when they hit a big play, it looked great, but they were not able to sustain, 6-play, 8-play, 10-play drive really all year long. And you saw it again against Oregon State where they'd get like right into the Beavers territory and then everything would bog down. The difference is they didn't have a guy at quarterback who could pop off a 20-yard run and save them. And, Richardson didn't always pop off a 20-yard run and save them, but sometimes he did. And that's why they wound up 6-7 instead of 3-9 or something, because they had that guy back there to be able to do that.
Yeah. As far as, in game, but also for the season, we'll throw out there the results one more time. Just can't handle momentum, Will. Started the season, that big win versus Utah the very next week, the clunker versus Kentucky. And then, as you said, not really able to, build on a good performance versus Tennessee. Yeah, you had the back-to-back wins versus Eastern Washington and Missouri, but still couldn't. Even those 2 wins, didn't amount. It set up a big game versus LSU in the Swamp, and then the inconsistency of that game, where it was a 10-point game, but Florida had to storm back in that game. But then the big one. I mean, we all felt really good about the Texas A&M South Carolina games. No matter how bad those teams were at the time, and South Carolina ended up being a pretty good team after that, you definitely were riding a wave of momentum. Florida should have had some confidence going into Nashville, couldn't put it together. A disappointing loss there in Nashville. Florida State's a good team, but you hope you find a way to go beat a rival there. Your last rival of the season, going 0-4 against Tennessee, LSU, Georgia, and Florida State. But a lot of it was just when you were feel good about this team, they would let you down. And look, in some cases, that's the mark of inconsistency with a first-year head coach. I don't want to necessarily throw it all on that. Not every inconsistency, not every negative that happened this year, I don't think you can just chalk up and say, first-year head coach, it happens. But man, this momentum one, this is the one that really that's the one that really gets me. There should have been maybe some grow, especially late in the season, maybe some grow up moments. You go get those late season victories versus Texas A&M and South Carolina. That should have amounted to more.
Well, it's just so goofy that the only quality win on the entire schedule is Utah. So they start out the year with a really, really high quality win. And then anytime they played anybody decent, just completely fell over. Like Kentucky, not a great team this year,
no.
but really dominated that game from about 5 minutes left in the second quarter until the end. Tennessee, really good team. Florida wasn't really in that game. Obviously, they come back at the end, get the onside kick, but let's be honest, that kind of would have taken a miracle. LSU, they really weren't in that game either. They gave up 6 straight touchdowns. Georgia, it wasn't even close. I get that they brought it back to 1 score, but it was 28-3 at the half. Come on, guys. And then, obviously the loss to Vanderbilt's bad. And then Florida State was a good team. They lost that one. They gave up 42 points a game to their main rivals, Florida State, Georgia, LSU, and Tennessee. You give up 42 points a game to those rivals. I mean, that's the problem. They started 0-4 before the season even started, because if you're going to give up 42 points to those 4, now you got to find 6 wins somewhere to make it to a bowl. In some ways, it's actually a miracle that they made it to a bowl game when you factor in the Kentucky, just like, whatever that was from Anthony Richardson in that game. Like, this season could have been worse. I mean, that Utah game could have been a loss too, right? I mean, if Cam Rising doesn't throw the ball to Bernie, or if the ball bounces off of Bernie's shoulder pads and they get another play, it's entirely possible that Utah game is a loss, and or even the South Florida game was a loss. And can you imagine what this would be like if we were sitting here? Now, we wouldn't be having a bowl conversation at this point if any of those games had gone the wrong way. But, there are a couple of games in there. I mean, 1-score games, Utah and South Florida go Florida's way. The Tennessee game is a 1-score game. That's a loss. Missouri 1 score. It's a win. So again, I look at it and I go 3-3. They're kind of lucky to have have managed that. And again, I think the Florida State game 45-38, but it really wasn't that close based on the third quarter and how they played. Vanderbilt 31-24, but it really wasn't that close. And that's sort of the theme is whenever they played anybody who was up to play them and even a decent team, they really struggled, and they started behind the eight ball just because of how bad the defense was. And we can it was funny all year long. I'm sitting there going, Anthony Richardson isn't bad. He's been inconsistent, but he's not bad. The defense was consistently bad all year long. And, out of all the things that Billy Napier and staff need to fix, like, it has nothing to do with the offensive side of the ball.
All right, we will get to the other side of the ball in that defense.
Do we have to?
Well, I guess we do. Yes, we do. And some more to go through there. But first, a message from our friends at Shark Coatings.
You know the goosebumps you get when Florida takes the field? Or when that 63-yard Hail Mary actually works? Or the thrill of a game-winning interception in the end zone? What a rush! You can experience that same rush every day at your home with Shark Coatings. We'll cover your old, ugly concrete with a beautiful industrial concrete coating and a warranty that lasts longer than most careers in professional football. So whether your garage floor is for parking, partying, or working out, Shark Coatings can transform it. And if your pool deck is starting to look like a bulldog, old, cracked, and smells like pee, Shark Coatings can transform that too. Shark Coatings is easy to clean, stain resistant, and is 100% antibacterial and antimicrobial. We're easy on the eyes and on the maintenance. Gator Nation is worldwide, and Shark Coatings is based right in the heart of it. So whether you live in Brunswick, Georgia, or Live Oak, Florida, down to Ocala, over to New Smyrna Beach, or anywhere in between, contact us for a free estimate today. Learn more at sharkfloorcoatings.com. That's sharkfloorcoatings.com.
All right, and we'll go to the defense before we circle back around some other things. It's a success overall for the program. Yeah, no, it's a success on the defense. And look, you and I don't let me speak for you. I'm sorry, but at least for me, I did put it simplistically. This defense will be better just because Todd Grantham will not be on the sideline. And boy, that was that did not turn out that way at all. 2020 defense bad, 2021 defense bad, 2022 defense bad. And no, there really wasn't much improvement except for turnovers. That was really about it that you can really point to. And I think, besides creating those turnovers, there's not much to point to, Will. One disappointing aspect for me, the 5 stars that you have on that side of the ball, Jervon Dexter, Jason Marshall, they did not get any better in year one of Patrick Toney. I do think Amari Burney improved as a player in his final season. The safety play, Patrick Toney's position, very, very underwhelming. You had some experience back there on that end, and those guys never really stepped through to make much of a difference, a consistent difference on that side of the ball. And that's Patrick Toney's position that he's supposed to coach. And going back to the preseason, Will, I mean, it all sounded good on the surface of, reading your keys and knowing where to be and knowing how to tackle and knowing the correct angle to take. And we saw some of the same mistakes we've seen the last couple of years with this defense of lack of angles amounting to bad tackles. And then, of course, speaking of tackling, that became an issue and stayed an issue. Too many times we saw Hendon Hooker and Jaden Daniels and Jordan Travis make spectacular plays while under duress in the backfield. Too many times this defense just could not finish plays.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I want to go back to what you said. 2020's defense was awful. 2021's offense was actually a little bit better, but had bad spurts. This defense blew both of those away in terms of how bad it was. And how bad it was consistently and how bad it was against particularly running quarterbacks. Like you think about Jaden Daniels, you think about Jerry Bohannon for USF. Will Levis was really the only quarterback they were any good against. And a lot of people were good against Will Levis this year. So, he'll go in the top 5 in the draft. But
and Spencer Rattler, I guess.
Well, yeah. Well, that's true. That's one that you should probably that whole game, though, was just weird. But I think we learned a couple of things. One, Patrick Toney isn't a miracle worker. That he wasn't just able to take the team that or the defense that Florida had made it better. But I think we also learned he may not be good. And there's still a jury out on whether he's actually a good defensive coordinator. And I'm not willing to sit here and say, yeah, I think he's going to be good. I haven't seen anything this year that really indicates that he's going to be good. Like, I was extraordinarily disappointed and very critical of the game plan against Florida State. I thought it was pretty clear that Jordan Travis struggled against zone defenses and would eat alive man-to-man defenses. And the reason is that he'd be able to run against it. And sure enough, every third down, they were bringing blitzes. Travis was able to get loose and he was able to run. And that's not hindsight is 2020. That's in my preview. I said, this is how you stop Jordan Travis. And the minute they came out in a single high safety on a third down, I went, oh no, like this is what they're doing. And look, I'm not a coach who spent years looking at film and who spent years preparing for this, but I could see it, right? You go look at the Wake Forest tape, and this is how they stop it. Now, look, I'm not sure this defense would have stopped Florida State if they had set in zones, because they're not really good at doing that either. But the fact that there was zero identity, zero improvement throughout the year, that, you know, we're sort of hanging our hats on being able to stop Haynes King and Spencer Rattler like a week before he happened to get his confidence back, I think is indicative of things. Like, this is a team that's supposed to be able to go out and compete with Georgia, compete with LSU, compete with Tennessee, and they just got blown off the field by all of the teams that you're aiming towards. And look, I mean, is that talent? I mean, certainly attrition matters. It would have really been helpful to have Moma Diabate or Tyron Hopper or Chris Bogle or Chester Kembrough, but you know, those are all guys who either before or right after Napier came in were allowed to leave. And if your defense needs those guys in order to succeed, well, you know, don't let them go to Utah. Don't let them go to Missouri, right? That's all part of the recruiting bit, is bringing the guys in or keeping the guys in place. I mean, I remember there was a story about Napier basically shaking, I think it was Bogle's hand and saying, hey, we need to talk or something when he came in. And Bogle decided to go someplace else. Well, you know what? That matters too, that you weren't able to convince the guy to come in. And I don't know exactly what Bogle was able to accomplish this year, but man, after watching this defense, I can understand maybe why he didn't want to stay and play in it. It was bad all year long. And it didn't get better. That's the thing, is if they'd been bad early in the year and then it got better over time, okay, that's one thing. But it was just the same mistakes, the same stupid crap, the same bad, you know, the same.
And we thought so. You had those 6 good quarters, and it was like, okay, maybe they have found something. And nope, it was kind of just back to playing.
Well, I think what they found is a couple of opponents who were going through some of the same growing pains that they were. Right. Certainly, A&M was no great shakes this year. We thought they might be able to get it back together, and they sort of headed in the other direction until they won their last game against LSU. And it was the same thing with South Carolina. Like they were a team that really sort of found themselves the week after the loss to Florida. And in fact, getting buried by Florida in some ways, I think, sort of freed them up to be able to go out and say, to heck with it. We're just going to let it all rip against Tennessee. And all of a sudden you hit a couple of passes and everything sort of opens up. And you know, you mentioned earlier Florida's inability to sort of deal with success or failure. And this was one of those where it just felt like the way I described it when Anthony Richardson declared for the NFL is that he was a player who was sort of, you know, his play was an avalanche. It was either everything was going good and it would all continue to go good until one thing went bad. And then it's like, okay, it's an avalanche in the other direction. And this team was sort of like that on defense too. It was, you know, hey, we get out and we get one stop. Their inability to stop anybody in the red zone, like that was the thing that even stood out against Oregon State, right? Is they stopped them once for a field goal because they actually stopped them. They made kind of a nice tackle, kind of the guy stumbled a yard short, and then Oregon State screwed up the conversion and didn't line up right, and so gets a false start, and that's how they get the stop. And then the second one, they get it where Goldbranson just runs out of bounds with a second left, almost let the clock run out, but that was one where the defense let him go right down the field after converting a 3rd and 1 earlier on sort of a weird fake busted play. Yeah. You know, those are the things that happened all year. Like the fact that Oregon State was only up 10-0 was a miracle there in the first half. And in the second half, they just kind of put it on them. And you know, that's kind of what the story was all year long, was if a team got into the red zone against Florida, it was 7, it was not 3. And they're going to have to figure out a way to stop that, because when the field shrinks, you're supposed to be able to take things away. And they just weren't ever able to take anything away.
Yeah, well, then not to go into like specific play calls or anything like that, but we do know game management, play calling at times a lot different, a lot to learn here in the SEC for Billy Napier, and specifically, I was just not necessarily a specific play or anything like that. There's a litany of them to go through, but the right before halftime, right after halftime, for the Gators, that continued there in the bowl game as well. But that just seemed to be an issue of being able to, whether you didn't trust your quarterback to go out there and make the play, whether you didn't trust your defense out there to not give up a quick score, the the play calling, the game management before halftime, and then whatever happens in the locker room after halftime, you weren't able to stop teams coming out of halftime. Weren't able to put drives together coming out of halftime that would, you had a chance to maybe close the score, maybe a chance to go 2-for-1, and Florida just for whatever reason couldn't do it. But around that halftime mark, like middle 8, a lot of coaches point to game-turning decisions, game-turning plays happening in that middle 8. And Florida was just putrid there most of the season.
Yeah, well, and this is one of the things where I think the noise about an offensive coordinator is probably fair, and it's never going to stop. And that's what happens when you do unconventional things, right? Is that you do something that's a little bit unconventional, so you can get that second offensive line coach in there, and you say that gives you an advantage. Well, that's all well and good until you get stuffed by a team in the bowl game and you got nothing left, and you can't move the ball. And I think in many ways, it reminds me of the movie Bull Durham, where the minor league players walking around and he's got fungus on his shower shoes. He's like, you can't do this here in the minors. You get to the show, you win 20 games, and hey, the press will call you colorful. Here it means you're a slob. And I feel like it's kind of the same thing. At Louisiana, you can walk around and make these kind of mistakes and no one's going to crucify you for it, right? You go to Florida where the big lights are, you better be winning 10, 11, 12 games if you're doing things unconventionally. Now, look, the unconventional things may end up paying off in the long term, but you're going to have to take the hit right now. And that's one of the things I think that we learned is that the minute something goes wrong on offense, everyone is going to point to the fact that you don't have an offensive coordinator, that you've been doing things unconventionally. The minute you screw up any sort of clock management, it's going to be, well, you've got too much on your plate. You need to offload those sorts of things. Look, I don't know whether that's the appropriate answer. It feels like they have enough people that they should have a guy in his ear telling them what to do for these sorts of decisions. But the fact that they're coming out in the second half and just getting absolutely blitzed in just about every game, that the 4 in and the 4 out is really a telling stat in terms of their just ability to actually manage a game and understand football situations where, look, you give up 2 straight touchdowns to Tennessee, game over. You give up a touchdown to LSU coming out of the half, game over. Like, you got to bow up. You got to make the stop. 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1 against or 4th and 2 against Oregon State the other night. You can't give up the fake. Like, you just can't, right? You got to understand that that's got to be a safe, and this is one of those things where the discipline comes in too. I haven't really heard anybody talk about this, but you get the 15-yard penalty on a late hit after the blocked field goal. So you're kicking off from the 20, which gives Oregon State good field position to start with. You get them stopped, but it's near midfield when you get them stopped rather than maybe at like their own 35-yard line. I'm a lot braver calling that fake punt if it's at midfield than I am if I'm back at my own 30 or 35. So even those little details just seem to elude the team. And that eventually at some point rolls all the way up to the head guy.
Yeah, definitely left a lot to be desired there. As far as pure play calling is needing an OC, I don't know. I'm not fully on board with that, but at least give me an OC if that's going to help Billy Napier manage a game better. I think there's a couple ways to look at that, but I think we'll get a clearer picture there next year because the last point I'll go to developing a quarterback. You had AR coming in. I don't think you probably would have found many people out there higher on Anthony Richardson coming into this season than I would have been. I was pretty high on Anthony Richardson and the explosion, the capability, the potential that the quarterback had. And it just didn't come to fruition, whether that be Billy Napier's fault, Anthony Richardson's fault. But, the quarterback position did not develop like I thought it would throughout the year. And it's hard to know where to place that blame. And I know when things aren't going right, we'll ultimately fall on the head coach when a lot of other things also go wrong. But at the same time, I don't think Anthony Richardson did much to help himself. But how much can be put on Billy Napier not to get the most out of the quarterback position? I think once we have more to go by, we can do a little bit of revisionist history, come back and look at this and maybe see the issue was more player or more coach. But at this moment, at least we can say Anthony Richardson did not develop into the quarterback that we thought he would. Yeah,
that was one of the things I had listed as what do we learn? And the way I wrote it was I said the next great Florida quarterback isn't on the roster yet. Right, that it wasn't Anthony Richardson, and that's valuable to find out, right? It's not Jalen Kitna for obvious reasons, and it's not Jack Miller. We just found that out in the bowl game, right? And so you now know that. Now, maybe it's Max Brown, but I think that's probably highly unlikely, which means you've got Jaden Rashada coming in, you've got DJ Lagway coming in, And then who are you going to bring in the transfer portal? And the quickest way to turn things around is to have a guy who can mask all of the different holes you've got in different places, right? Like if you've got an elite quarterback who is able to execute your offense and execute it well, you're not losing to Vanderbilt. You're not losing that game to Kentucky. You're a little bit more competitive in some of those other games. You're going 9-3, 10-2. And that's kind of, I think, what Napier probably needs to show in year 2 to really sort of get some of the people who are doubting him back on his side. He has other things he needs to show for me to be back, to be like fully in his camp in terms of that sort of stuff. But I think in terms of on-field performance, that's probably what you're looking for. And so things do become important in terms of who can you bring into the transfer portal, right? You got Anthony Richardson leaving. Kitten is off the team. Jack Miller isn't it. So who are you bringing in, right? Even if you think Max Brown is great, you still need people to back him up. Is Rashada going to be ready the first day he comes in? Or are you just going to hand him the job? If you are, do you need somebody to back him up? Or are you going to go out and get a guy like Grayson McCall or Devin Leary or somebody else who's going to come in through the transfer portal and be maybe not the next great Florida quarterback, but be a serviceable Florida quarterback or a consistent Florida quarterback that we haven't had in a really long time, right? I mean, Emory Jones wasn't consistent, and Anthony Richardson certainly wasn't consistent. Kyle Trask was, and even with this is the rub, is even with Kyle Trask firing at all cylinders there in 2020, the team still went 8-4. And that goes back to they're going to have to fix some stuff on the defense, even if they find the next great Florida quarterback. So I know people are going to want Rashada to start right away. I think in many ways I want Rashada to start right away, but that's more because I want to know what we have early on. But we saw Felipe Franks start right away in 2017. That didn't turn out real well in that 2017 season. So I do think that there needs to be some deference paid to, who's having a lot of competition in camp and making Rashada win the job if he's going to actually end up being the starter next year, especially to start the year. But the problem is that you look at most teams and you go, okay, like we've got a okay defense. All we need is a guy to make the engine run. And if we score 45 points a game, it'll be fine. And I'm not sure that would have been good enough to go 8-4 this year. I think if you'd have scored 45 points a game, you would have been playing 1-score games against your rivals, and your rivals probably would have been, there were a couple of games there where teams took their foot off the gas, and Florida was kind of able to come back in those. I'm not sure that happens if you've got a better guy at quarterback. I'm not sure how much better the record would have been just because the defense was so bad. So, look, I think it's clear though, and it's valuable, right? I think we came out of last year, and one of the problems with Mullen, one of the reasons that he was dismissed beyond the recruiting is that everybody looked at Emory Jones and said, we know he's not the next great quarterback. It looks like you might have the next great quarterback behind him. And we had hopes that Anthony Richardson was going to be that next great quarterback. He wasn't, at least not this year, but I think the promise was still there. And so that's the question to me, is the guy next year is going to have to be somebody who sort of gives you that hope that even if he's not great this year, that he's going to have the ability to do that. And I'm suspecting Rashada probably has that, at least in terms of winning over the fan base. Rashada is probably the answer there, but I think we both think they're going to go through the transfer portal to bring somebody in.
Yeah, we'll see where that goes. It kind of goes into the storyline a little bit. But yeah, there's Will, anything else you want to put on there for kind of what you learned this year? I think we hit.
Yeah, I think on the good side, we mentioned him a little bit, but I think it's worth mentioning specifically that Trevor Etienne has the potential to be special.
Yep.
Right. It's not just that he's productive. It's not just that he was productive for a freshman. He has the opportunity to be special. And so you think
what
about
was the stat the game showed the other day? The highest yards per carry for a freshman, minimum 100 carries. I think was what the bowl game showed the other day. So.
Yeah, I mean he's been fantastic all year long, and even it's not like he's just got straight line speed where he's busting off a couple of 85-yard runs, and that number is skewed. He's got one. He's got one really long run. He's got a lot of 16, 17, 18-yard runs. He has a lot of runs too where, hey, it's 3rd and 6, Napier gives him the ball. He should be stopped, 3-4 yards in. Instead, he's got a little bit of wiggle, and he's able to get past the defender and push it and get a first down. There are a lot of hidden plays that Etienne had where he brings value, not just from being a guy like Dalvin Cook, who's going to, outrace you to the edge and be able to go for a home run, but he's going to be able to get you those tough yards inside. So I think from a good thing, I think that's something that we learned, is that Etienne has more. Like, I think Montrell Johnson's a very good running back, but I don't think he has the potential to be special. I think Etienne has the potential to be special. And then on the bad side, I think what we learned is that discipline wasn't just a Mullen problem, that, it needs to be fixed. But I do think we should be concerned now that this is 3 straight regimes that have had discipline issues. You had McElwain with the credit card scandal. You had Mullen with the shoe toss and all the other things that were going on, and now you've got all this just litany of penalties and undisciplined penalties, undisciplined play that's happened in the last 3 games. And so the fact that we sort of thought that was all going to be fixed with Napier coming in here, that needs to be fixed next year, right? I mean, there needs to be enough people that you can yank someone off the field. Again,
I just don't know where it came from.
Well,
like it wasn't that big of an issue until the last 3 games.
Yeah, but the thing that I really worry about is, Torrance had that late hit on the quarterback.
Yep.
And Kamari Wilson wasn't in there on the next play, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's still out there. So the mistakes are being made and guys are not being taken off the field for mistakes, even when they're 6-6, right? Like, what do you really have to lose by bringing somebody in there?
And the last game of the season.
Oh, he's going to get beat. Well, geez, like that's been a problem for this defense. Just, let the guy get beat. So I haven't seen an accountability, at least in terms of snaps, who starts, those sorts of things throughout the year. The only time we might have seen it a little bit was after that Tennessee game. Trey Dean was injured the next game, but look, he might have been legitimately injured. And, you had Kamari Wilson start that one. Other than that, it's been basically the same starting lineup all year long. And, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over. And certainly the defense is giving up touchdowns over and over and over again. And there haven't been a lot of adjustments that have been made. I mean, when we had Redmond on last week, he was talking about Chris McClellan, thinking that he hasn't had enough snaps. I think anybody who's seen him play thinks the same thing, right? That we've watched the defensive line get blown off the ball a few different times, and it would have been good to have McClellan in there more often. Look, I'm not a coach. I'm sure there are reasons that they have these guys in there. But I do think that one of the things we're going to be looking for next year, and one of the things I'm going to be looking for, is not just does Florida have less penalty yardage. It's going to be, do we get these stupid, undisciplined 15-yard penalties when there's no reason to get it? Like you get the block punt or the block field goal, you're returning it back the other way. Wingo goes down, and I think it was Miguel Mitchell comes up and just absolutely blasts somebody who's standing right on top of the guy who got tackled. Like, and then 3 Gators go up and celebrate with Mitchell after he hit him. And I'm like, no, that was a stupid play. Like, don't celebrate with him. Like, he just cost you 15 yards. And yeah, it's on the opening kickoff of the second half. And yeah, we forget about that sort of stuff. But, the fact that Florida, just the hidden yardage drove me crazy this year, where they'd bring out kickoffs that they could have fair caught, and they'd end up at the 19-yard line or at the 10-yard line, or because they got a holding penalty or those sorts of things. They had maybe like 2 big-time returns. And did that really offset the fact that they were at a disadvantage in field position for every game they played in this year? Like, if you look at the advanced stats, I think I said this a couple of weeks ago, but Florida had a 5-yard disadvantage in terms of starting field position to their opponents for the entire year. So their opponents were starting like 67 yards from scoring, and Florida was starting like 72 yards from scoring. And that includes turnovers and all that sort of stuff, right? So they had a 5-yard disadvantage just starting the year or just starting the game. And so it's worth like a couple of points. And you've got these 3 one-score losses, and you've got the 4 minutes going into half, and the 4 minutes coming out of half, and you start building all those little things. That was actually my criticism of Napier in terms of taking the field goal the first time against Oregon State and then going for it the second time. I'm okay with either decision. I'm not okay with changing your decision because nothing really changed in terms of the game. Like the down, the yardage, the yard line, all that stuff was almost identical. And you look at the percentages, and the percentages were almost the same. And so if that's the case, then if you're going to play the percentages, then you play the percentage every time. You don't watch the guy miss a field goal the first time and then go, well, I mean, it's not like Mihalik pulled it and wasn't even close. He missed by like a half a yard to the left. So if you thought it was good enough to do the field goal the first time, then you do it the second time. If it wasn't good enough, if the opportunity to go for it was good the second time, then it should have been good for it the first time. You should do those things consistently, because over time, if you make the right decisions, you're going to gain your team a couple of points here, 1.5 points here, 3 points on average here. And now it builds up to, hey, you're winning those 1-score games. And they just didn't do that this year. So from a discipline perspective on field, I think discipline within the coaching, not making emotional decisions. I will still stick with, I think there actually were some analytical reasons why going forward on 4th down against Kentucky might have been the right call, at least on the first one. I don't think there was any reason on the second one. And I think that the mix of analytics with emotion is bad. You don't want to do it that way. That's a poor way of approaching things. You either want to do it via emotion and gut just every time, or do it via analytics. But to try doing both is going to cause problems.
Scared money, you make money, don't make money, or something, something like that.
Then don't take the field goal the first time.
All right, well, there we go. Yeah, what we learned this season, well, I'm sure we'll kind of hit back on that all off season. Some things will kind of come back to our minds as we go through different aspects of this team. Before we go on, a little bit of preview for early signing period starting on Wednesday. Wednesday, Thursday will be some important days for the Gators. As we said, a week ago, we got together with Bob Redmond from the Gator Collective after a huge recruiting weekend for the Gators. All the vibes coming out of that weekend with many top targets for Florida was set up to have this big finish for early signing day, early signing period. And exactly 1 week later, we're sitting back here and that big finish does not look likely. Does not look like it's coming to fruition there for the Gators on the recruiting trail. Look, that started last week, as Will said earlier in this episode. Thursday, offensive lineman Samson Okunlola committed to Miami over Florida. That continued into Sunday. Mark Fletcher, the running back, who we talked about last week. Florida, not that well. Thought we not. I mean, we could say the visit out of the park last week, but that vibe, that feeling, did not last a whole week. We knew if he probably took that visit to Miami, it probably was not going to be good news for Florida. Fletcher takes that visit to Miami, commits to Miami on Sunday. And at that one, I mean, granted, second running back in the class. It wasn't just top running back. I mean, I think you can get by with that one. Now, don't get me wrong. That is a player the staff wanted. They targeted him. They offered him. Thought he was coming after last weekend, only for him to not. But as some big miss, no. Optics losing another one to Miami. Yeah, that absolutely hurts. But, kind of now we'll go into this week and just some of the targets. Now, everybody kind of can look and who knows who is committed for Florida right now. And now we're just kind of looking at targets and who could maybe be deciding for Florida this week. Quaver Saul there. James Smith, also 5-star defensive lineman there from Alabama. I'd say Bama for those guys right there. And then Jaden Platt, the tight end that visited not this past weekend, but the weekend before. We were wondering if he would take a visit to Texas A&M, who kind of had the early lead. Then he visits Florida last weekend. Another player we heard a whole lot of good news about. But the 4-star tight end did visit Texas A&M this past weekend. There was good news coming out of there for the Aggies, so maybe a 50-50 battle with tight end Jaden Platt. And then we got to wait till Thursday for the decisions of cornerback 5-star Desmond Ricks and 4-star defensive lineman Jordan Hall. And right now, Jordan Hall, I'd say I'd be leaning Georgia. I've been leaning Georgia for a while. I think Florida maybe did close the gap a little bit. Don't know if they ever got over the hump on that one. I'd say Jordan Hall and his decision will come down to Florida, Georgia on Thursday. Look for Georgia to be the pick. And then Desmond Ricks, the 5-star corner, took that visit to LSU this past weekend. LSU kind of seems to be the team trending right there. So for whatever reason, Will, all the good feelings we had this last week, well, not for whatever reason, we know most of the reason, but a week ago, all the good vibes, all the good feelings coming off of a big recruiting weekend, only for a week later. And I mean, it is very possible Florida strikes out, and whoever they have committed right now is who is in the class on Wednesday/Thursday.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we all had high hopes for where this was going, particularly after recruiting started to pick up in August and September. But I think it's also important to look back at history and sort of look at what I've been saying now for years since Dan Mullen was there, since Dan Mullen was at Florida, which is that your class in August and September is typically, in terms of average player rating, kind of where your class ends up at the end. And Napier's actually been able to boost his average player rating quite a bit. They've I don't know whether they've processed him out or they've just had a couple of decommits at the lower ranking levels, but they're up around 92. I think they're around like 90.5 in terms of average player rating there in August and September. But if they strike out on some of these guys, I mean, Walker, Platt, and obviously they've already struck out with Okunlola and Fletcher, but if they strike out with Ricks and with Jordan Hall, well, now you're bringing in guys like Caden Jones, the offensive tackle out of New Orleans, potentially. And look, Jones is a good player, but he's ranked 489th overall. His average player rating is 88.61. He's going to drag that overall rating back down to where we started in August and September. And that's kind of where we're trending.
And the update on that one is he took a trip to A&M, and it's another one we thought was a slam dunk last week is now a 50-50 battle between Florida and the Aggies.
Well, so it turns out you can never let up, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that you cannot assume that you've got a guy committed until he actually says he's committed. You can't assume that, somebody's not going to take a visit. And especially in the world of NIL, you can't assume that the offer that you have isn't going to be upped someplace else. And you got to either be prepared to up it or you got to know what your ceiling is. And look, I can't pretend to know everything that's going on in terms of these sorts of things. All I know is that Florida seems to have guys who are basically sitting there going, yeah, Florida, yeah, Florida, yeah, Florida. And then all of a sudden they're looking someplace else. That screams to me NIL, but it
Mm-hmm.
also screams to me that the organization is not putting the same emphasis on NIL as other organizations are. And that's something that they're either going to have to fix or they're going to have to win unconventionally. And, I've been working on this article now for like 3 weeks. I'm going to have it out before early signing day, but the class that most closely resembles what Florida's doing right now is an Oregon class from I think it's 2019, where there were no 5-stars, but really, really high quality players. So one of the things I'm going to do in that article is look and see where that, where that Oregon team wound up. But the reality is that if you look at the playoff teams, so from 2014 to 2021, there are 5 teams that have the highest rating in terms of average player rating: Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, LSU, and Clemson. There have been 7 national champions since 2014 to 2021 in the playoff era. How many of those do you think are in the top 5 of the rating? All freaking 7. 36 teams have made the playoff total. 22 of them are from that top 5. 8 titles, I guess. Out of yeah. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 titles. Sorry, I misspoke. They've won all 8 titles. So, and for the vast majority of the time, the teams in the top 5 have advanced to the final. Right? Like the teams like Michigan State and Washington and even Oklahoma and Notre Dame, when they get there, they don't make it to the Cincinnati. They all lose in the semifinal, because when you finally play a big boy in that system, it's actually why, as hard as it is for me to do, I have to root for Ohio State, because I don't think Michigan or TCU has the firepower to take out Georgia. And I'm sitting there looking at it going, Ohio State may have the firepower to take them out. And oh my God, I can't deal with 2 straight national championships for the Bulldogs. So, I just look at it and I go, what is the goal at Florida? And if the goal at Florida is a national championship, you know where you need to be. The map is out. It is very clear. This is since 2014. You look at the average player rating. It's Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, LSU, and Clemson. All 8 national titles from 2014 and 2021, and a 2-4 shot at winning a national title this year, Georgia and Ohio State, with Michigan sitting there at 12th and getting there 2 straight years. So, not as though they're that far off. So anyway, I look at it. We all know what needs to be done, and they're going to have to figure out how to get it done. And the fact that they may strike out before early signing day is just really, really depressing.
Yeah, sense of urgency absolutely is needed right here from every level. As you said, if Florida's getting these good vibes and good feelings, on the staff thing, okay, maybe push for some commits, maybe push for some public commits. And sense of urgency from administration, boosters, getting more involved, more money involved. We know what it is. There's no sense in hiding behind a curtain. we know what's going on. There's money out there flying left and right. Florida needs more of it. So, we'll see if we can get a sense of urgency out there, but we'll definitely take a look at it all Wednesday. Who knows? Signing day can have some surprises here. We'll see, how desperate some certain people maybe get, and maybe that causes for some reaches or quote unquote. Here's one. Will overpaying. That's a very popular topic right now. But hey, you're worth what somebody's willing to pay you. So, and that's part of the sense of urgency, I guess, from my side as well. I put it this way, I just don't think you can dig yourself a hole.
Well, so the good news about college football is that 4 years from now, it won't matter who Georgia recruited this year. And 4 years from now, it won't matter who Alabama recruited this year. So when you get a monster class, you are catching up, because inevitably the monster class from 3 or 4 years ago is gone. So you only need to put together 2 or 3 monster classes to actually catch up to these guys. So it's not like we were 10 years behind in terms of what we need from a talent perspective. If this was the way the NFL worked, we'd be screwed, right? Because Alabama would be sitting there with 10 years worth of recruits built up that they were able to dominate you with. That's not what happens. It's a 2 or 3 year cycle for most of these guys, particularly with the transfer portal. You know, guys who come into Alabama, and we've seen it with A&M, right? A lot of guys transferring out of A&M. And so, you know, there is the opportunity to catch up to these guys if you're able to put together 2 or 3 monster classes in a row. I don't think you can put together, I don't think very good gets it done in the SEC. I think I have a lot of evidence that suggests very good doesn't get it done in the SEC. I think very good might get it done in the ACC. It probably doesn't get it done in the Big Ten. Michigan's kind of an exception. It definitely doesn't get it done in the Pac-12. So, you know, we can start talking about like where you might be able to be a very good recruiter and succeed. Like, again, you can head out west, but as we get Texas and Oklahoma coming into the SEC, as we get USC and UCLA coming into the Big Ten, like it's not going to get any easier, right? Like it's going to get even more difficult, and it's going to be even more chalk, I think, because you're going to have to face a better team. Like the Vanderbilt games of the world are going to start to go away as you get these elite conferences where you're going to play Oklahoma, Texas, Alabama, and Georgia in a 4-week stretch. Good luck. You better have really good players if you're doing that. And, you know, that's just the way the SEC is going to be.
Yep. So we're live here at some point Wednesday, going over signing day, the good and the bad. Well, we'll probably break it up like that. You know, not if the class isn't top 3, top 5, top 10, doesn't mean there's not good parts of the class. We'll definitely go in it. We'll talk about the good, the bad there for the class. Hopefully it will be a good day in some ways on Wednesday. Maybe, like I said, some surprises, maybe some change of hearts. Like if we just talked about just a week ago, we were feeling good and now we're feeling bad. Well, those changes as we get to Wednesday can change in just a couple of days' time as well. There's always those surprises there. It doesn't really necessarily seem to work out in Florida's favor. A lot of those big surprises sometimes seem to go the other way here for Florida. But now, as we count down to early signing day, we'll have to kind of just pay attention to the next couple of days. Decisions coming, maybe Wednesday and Thursday. Don't forget about Thursday. That's when Hall and Ricks will make their decision. So we'll see if we kind of hear some different thoughts on those two guys when Tuesday, Wednesday rolls around. But it'll kind of be a couple of days storyline for the Gators and a lot of targets out there. So
hopefully we can turn it around and make it a good storyline, because 2 straight depressing days, Wednesday and Thursday, not so good.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of this season and then how this is trending, I mean, we need some good news. And I know Rashada, as I said, that good news, we got him in the class, Lagway too, but that's kind of peeking ahead to 24. Just has not been a whole lot of good news lately for the Gators on or off the field. So, like I said, maybe that way in Vegas they found some wild cards, and there will, and throw some out this week.
Put some of Hathcock's money on black and see what happens.
There we go. All right, Will, anything else, man?
No, man, just appreciate it. Look, I mean, I think obviously it's been a little bit of a depressing episode, but certainly we appreciate everybody sticking with us all year long. You know, it's been 5 years now that we've been doing this. So 5 years in the books. It's been fun building this with you, buddy. Just want to thank you for having me on here every week during the last 5 years, and certainly thank everybody for listening. I hope people know that we don't take it for granted, that we get to interact and that we get to be a voice for this sort of thing. And I think it's important to emphasize that at the end of every season, that we really appreciate everybody interacting with us, downloading, listening, and commenting and all that sort of stuff. So it's a blast doing this stuff. We wish the news was better coming out of 2022, and we're hoping for better things in 2023, but we're not going to sit there and just wish and say, hey, there's, unicorns and rainbows there at the end of the recruiting class, if that's not really what's there. Like, we need to actually say, hey, these are the things that need to improve, because it's the only way you get better.
There we go. Will Miles. You can find him at readreaction.com, on YouTube, Read Reaction, on Twitter at Will Miles SEC. I will, hopefully, when I get this thing edited, not a lot of people will know, but I will apologize if you're watching this live for the technical difficulties. If you're watching or listening to the recording, you might hear some weird pauses and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it caught me live Caught me live a good couple times a night.
I was gonna say this is the first time we've ever had a technical difficulty that wasn't my fault, so I'm just enjoying it.
There we go. So, hi, I am David Waters, host of Gators Breakdown. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thank you for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.